Seconds before closing a $200 million deal that would change the landscape of artificial intelligence, billionaire Julian Croft was in a boardroom. He was in a Michelin-starred restaurant looking out the window, seeming less like an industry titan and more like a man who had lost his way. His revolutionary company, his life's work, hung by a thread. Meanwhile, a new waitress named Mia, burdened by student debts, a sick younger brother, and the weight of the world on her shoulders, approached his table. She was about to utter 5 words that could detonate the decade's biggest deal or, unknowingly, save them all. "You need to leave, sir." This is the story of what happened in those seconds and how a single moment of apparent disrespect became an act of salvation. The Gilded Kill wasn't just a restaurant, it was a stage. Every dish was a performance. Every diner, an actor in a play of wealth and power. Located on a quiet cobblestone street in downtown Boston, its discreet brass plaque was the only sign of the culinary theater it housed. For Amelia Bance, or Mia, as she insisted on being called, it was her last hope. At 24, Mia carried a weight that would buckle most. She was a senior computer science student at MIT, on a scholarship that covered tuition, but nothing else. The nothing else was the problem. The nothing else was the rent for the small apartment she shared with her 17-year-old brother Leo. The nothing else was Leo's mounting medical bills, a consequence of a rare autoimmune disorder requiring treatments barely recognized by their insurance. The nothing else was the reason she now wore a starched black apron that felt more like a straitjacket, trying to balance a tray of water glasses with hands that trembled slightly. Her manager, Mr. Henderson, was a man carved from polished granite, with a voice as cold and smooth as the marble bar. Henderson had hissed during her orientation, his eyes scanning her for imperfections. "Here, we don't have customers. We have patrons. They don't just come to eat. They come to exist undisturbed. Your job is to be invisible, instantaneous, and impeccable. A ghost anticipating every need, a single error, a dropped fork, a spilled drink, an ill-timed word, and you're a ghost forever. Understood?" Mia had understood perfectly. This job paid more per hour than any other she could find, and potential tips were the only thing standing between Leo's next treatment and a mountain of debt. She couldn't afford a single mistake. On her 3rd day, a Tuesday, lunch service was a symphony of whispered conversations and the delicate clinking of silverware against porcelain. Mia moved between tables with practiced invisibility, her mind a whirlwind of order numbers and seating diagrams. That's when she saw him. He was seated at table 7, the most coveted seat in the house. It was a corner booth upholstered in deep crimson velvet, offering a panoramic view of the public garden. It was reserved for the highest elite of patrons, senators, old money matriarchs, and CEOs reconfiguring the world between their appetizer and entree. But the man at table 7 didn't fit. He wore a faded gray hoodie, the kind you buy in a 3-pack. His jeans were worn, and his boots seemed to have covered more miles of pavement than the inside of a limousine. His hair was a disheveled mess of dark curls, and a several-day-old beard shadowed his jaw. He wasn't eating, he wasn't drinking, he was just sitting there staring out the window, his expression lost in a private, turbulent world. Mia's stomach tightened. A vagrant, a man who had walked in off the street, somehow managing to slip past the meticulous Maitre d' Henderson, who would have his head. She glanced toward the manager's station, but he was engrossed in a phone call, his back to the dining room. It was up to her. She took a deep breath, plastered on her service smile, and approached the table. "Good afternoon, sir. May I offer you some water? Perhaps a look at our wine list?" The man didn't move, didn't even blink. His gaze remained fixed on the golden leaves of the trees outside. It was as if she hadn't spoken at all. Mia felt a blush of heat rise up her neck. Some patrons at nearby tables were beginning to notice. She tried again, her voice a little firmer. "Sir, welcome to the Gilded Kill. May I get you something to drink?" Still nothing. He was completely lost in thought. His brow was furrowed. His hands rested on the pristine white tablecloth. He looked like a man fighting a ghost. A knot of pure ice formed in Mia's gut. Henderson's words echoed in her ears. Undisturbed. Ill-timed word, but this was different. This man was a disturbance by his mere presence. He was occupying the restaurant's most valuable space and hadn't even acknowledged her. Every minute he remained there was a potential $500 check she was losing, money she desperately needed for Leo. The rule was clear. If a table wasn't ordering, it had to be freed up. She retreated for a moment, busying herself refilling a water glass at a nearby table, her eyes darting back to the man in the hoodie. He hadn't moved a muscle. He was a statue of anxiety in a temple of luxury. This couldn't continue. She had to be direct. The risk of Henderson seeing her do nothing was greater than the risk of confronting the man. One was negligence, the other was enforcing policy. She chose policy. Mia's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat a drum of impending doom. She could feel the weight of Mr. Henderson's expectations, the ghostly touch of Leo's medical bills in her pocket, and the curious, critical stares from surrounding tables. Table 7 was a focal point, and she and the silent man were caught in its glare. She approached for a third time. This time, there was no smile. Her expression was a mask of professional resolve, but her mind was a frantic chaos. "Just order something," she silently pleaded. "A coffee? A glass of water? Anything to justify your existence here." "Sir?" Her voice was low but sharp, cutting through the room's ambient murmur. "I must insist. If you do not plan to dine with us, I will have to ask you to vacate the table." The man's head turned slowly, as if being dragged by an immense, invisible weight. His eyes met hers for the first time. They weren't angry or empty. They were a striking hazel and filled with a bone-deep exhaustion. That threw her off for a second. He looked at her, truly looked at her, as if she were a complex equation he was trying to solve, but said nothing, only held her gaze for a long moment before turning back to the window. That was it. It was the dismissal that broke her resolve. Now it felt personal. It wasn't just that he was ignoring a waitress. He was ignoring her, Amelia Bance, a person fighting with every fiber of her being to keep her life from collapsing. His silent indifference felt like a blatant show of disrespect, a luxury she could never afford. She felt a surge of adrenaline, the kind that comes from desperation. This was her job, her responsibility. Protecting the sanctity of the Gilded Kill was, by extension, protecting her ability to care for her brother. "Sir, this is the third time I've addressed you," her voice now dangerously close to losing its professional veneer. "This table is reserved. We have a waiting list of distinguished patrons. Your presence here, without ordering, is a disruption." He sighed, a barely audible breath, and ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Finally he spoke, his voice raspy as if he hadn't used it in days. "I'm waiting for someone." "Whom are you waiting for?" Mia pressed, suspecting a possible lie. "Marcus Torn," he murmured, his eyes still on the world outside. Mia almost laughed. Marcus Torn, CEO of Torn Canale Data, a corporate colossus. Torney was a legend in Boston financial circles, a man whose photo frequently appeared in the Wall Street Journal, always in a perfectly tailored suit. He was the epitome of the Gilded Kill's clientele. The idea that he'd be meeting this disheveled man was laughable. It was the kind of name you drop when you're trying to seem important. "Mr. Torn has a standing reservation," Mia said, her tone clipped and definitive. "It's for 2 people at 12:30 p.m. It is now 12:28 p.m., and I can assure you his companion wouldn't be seated without him. Our policy is to seat complete parties only." She had him. It was a clear and irrefutable violation of protocol. The man must have known the name and was trying to use it. The man, Julian Croft, finally gave her his full attention. A flicker of something, annoyance, surprise, crossed his features. "Policy is inefficient," he stated simply, as if observing a bug in a piece of code. "Policy," Mia retorted, her patience completely exhausted, "is the rule, and you are breaking it." This was the point of no return. Mr. Henderson was now off the phone, his hawk-like eyes beginning to sweep the dining room. He would see her in another 10 seconds. She had to act now. She had to be decisive. She took half a step closer, lowered her voice to a fierce, non-negotiable whisper, and channeled every ounce of her fear and frustration into 5 simple words. "You need to leave, sir." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cold as ice. The man's exhausted eyes widened slightly. He opened his mouth to say something, a protest or an explanation. But at that precise moment, the restaurant's heavy oak doors burst open. The maitre d' practically bowed as he led in a group of 3 men in impeccable $5,000 suits. The man at the front was unmistakable. It was Marcus Torn, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his face a mask of confident avarice. "Julian," Torn boomed, his voice filling the room. "Apologies for being a minute late. Traffic was hell." He strode toward table 7, looking directly at the man in the gray hoodie. The world seemed to slow. The clinking of silverware faded. The whispered conversations died. Mia felt the blood drain from her face, leaving a cold, tingling emptiness. Her gaze darted from the stunned, tired face of the man she had just tried to eject to the approaching industry titan and to Mr. Henderson, whose face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Marcus Torn paused at the table, his smile faltering as he took in the scene, his $200 million acquisition target being reprimanded by a new waitress. Mr. Henderson suddenly appeared beside Mia, his hand gripping her arm like a vice. His whisper was more terrifying than any shout. "What have you done?" Mia couldn't answer. She could only stare at the man in the hoodie, Julian Croft, CEO of Talred Inventions, the genius whose face she now vaguely recalled from the cover of a tech magazine she'd seen last week, the man she had just told to leave. The deal wasn't seconds away, it was happening now, and she had just thrown a grenade into the middle of it all. The silence at table 7 was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. It crushed Mia, squeezing the air from her lungs. Julian Croft said nothing, his hazel eyes holding hers with an unreadable expression. Marcus Torn remained frozen, his hand half extended for a handshake that would never materialize. His two associates, shark-like men in pinstripe suits, exchanged confused, uneasy glances. Then Mr. Henderson moved, pushing Mia aside with a force that made her stumble, a low growl escaping his lips. He practically fell over himself apologizing to Julian. "Mr. Croft, my sincerest apologies. A million. This is a new hire, a grave, unforgivable training error. Amelia, you're fired. Get your things and disappear from my sight now." The words were like bullets. Fired. Gone. They hit her with physical force. Her legs felt weak. Her vision narrowed until all she could see was Henderson's apoplectic face fired on the spot in the middle of the dining room. The humiliation was a searing, scorching flame, but it was the look on Julian Croft's face that truly broke her. He wasn't angry, he wasn't smug, he just looked tired. Slowly, he pushed his chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished hardwood floor. He stood, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The fawning manager, the stunned corporate titan, the terrified waitress. "It's okay," Julian said, his voice quiet, yet carrying an undeniable weight of finality. He looked at Marcus Torn. "Marcus, I don't think this is going to work." Torn's jaw dropped. "Julian, what? Don't be ridiculous. It's a misunderstanding. With the staff, we can—" "No," Julian interrupted, his voice cutting and clear. He wasn't just talking about lunch. Everyone in the room understood. He was talking about the deal, the $200 million acquisition of Talred Inventions by Torn Allied wasn't going to work. He pulled a crumpled $5 bill from his pocket and placed it on the table, a stark contrast to the pristine white linen. It was an insult, a gesture so dismissive it was more powerful than any shouted word. Without looking at anyone else, he turned and walked away. He passed Mia, his shoulder almost brushing hers, and for a fleeting second she caught the scent of coffee and ozone, like a late-night coding session. Then he was gone, through the heavy oak doors and out into the street, leaving a cloud of chaos in his wake. The room erupted in frantic whispers. Marcus Torn's face was a thundercloud of fury. "What the hell just happened?" he roared, not at anyone in particular, but at the universe itself. He whirled on Henderson. "Your establishment, your incompetence just cost me the deal of the year. You'll hear from my lawyers." Henderson, white as a sheet, turned his volcanic fury on the only remaining target. "You," he shrieked at Mia, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You're finished. You'll never work in this city again. I'll personally make sure you're blacklisted from every restaurant, every coffee shop, every hot dog stand. Now get out." Mia didn't need to be told again. She fled, pushing past gaping employees and patrons. She burst through the kitchen doors, ignoring the confused shouts of the chefs. She ripped off her apron, her hands trembling so violently she could barely untie the knot, and threw it to the floor. She snatched her backpack from a locker, her worn textbook on algorithmic design falling out, and ran for the back exit into the grimy service alley. The cool autumn air hit her like a slap in the face. She leaned against the cold brick wall, gulping breaths that felt filled with broken glass. It was all over. The job that was supposed to be her lifeline had lasted 3 days. The money for Leo's treatment was gone. The hope she had so carefully nurtured was gone, and it was all her fault. She had followed the rules, she had done as she was told, and in doing so she had singularly and deadly destroyed a $200 million deal in her own future. Tears of shame, anger, and pure, absolute terror streamed down her face. She had looked at one of the brightest minds of her generation and seen nothing but a vagrant. Her judgment, her perception, everything had been wrong. The weight of her failure was absolute. Slumping onto the greasy alley pavement, surrounded by the smell of garbage and shattered dreams, Mia finally allowed herself to break. The next 48 hours were a blur of gray. Mia's tiny apartment felt like a tomb. The city noise outside, Sirens, traffic, the distant laughter of people whose lives weren't falling apart seemed to come from another planet. She didn't answer her phone, didn't check her email, just sat on her lumpy couch, the algorithm's textbook open on the coffee table, its complex theorems a cruel mockery of her simple, catastrophic error. Leo came home from school, his usual cheer dying the moment he saw her face. "Mia, what's wrong? Did something happen at the restaurant?" She couldn't muster the courage to tell him the whole humiliating truth. "I lost the job, Leo." His face crumbled. He knew what that job meant. He asked no questions, just came over and sat beside her, resting his head on her shoulder. His silent solidarity was almost worse than shouting. He was the reason she fought so hard, and she had failed him. The guilt was a physical weight pressing on her chest, making it hard to breathe. That night, unable to sleep, she did the one thing that had always provided solace. She opened her laptop. The screen glowed in the dark, illuminating her tear-streaked face. On the display was not a social media feed or a streaming service, but line after line of impeccable Python code. It was her thesis project, a passion project, a dream. It was a predictive, analytical model designed to identify and assist at-risk youth in the public school system, using publicly available data to detect kids who were falling through the cracks, academically, socially, or economically. It was complex, ambitious, and deeply personal. It was why she was at Met, the manifestation of her belief that technology could be a force for good, not just for profit. She lost herself in the code, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Here she wasn't a failed waitress, she wasn't a disappointment. Here she was a builder, an architect of logic and reason. She worked for hours refining an anomaly detection subroutine, her focus absolute. It was in this world of pure logic that she could forget the illogical, messy chaos of her life. On the third morning after the incident, a sharp knock echoed through the apartment. Mia froze. The landlord? A debt collector? She crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A sleek, unmarked black car was parked at the curb. At her door stood a woman in a perfectly cut black suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked utterly out of place in the rundown hallway of her building. Mia opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" The woman's expression was neutral, betraying no emotion. "Amelia Bance?" "Yes, I'm she." "I'm Eleanor from Talred Inventions. Mr. Croft wishes to see you." Mia's blood ran cold. "Mr. Croft, Julian Croft. Why? To sue her? To personally nail the last nail in the coffin of her life?" Her mind raced through a dozen terrifying possibilities. "I don't understand," she stammered. "A car is waiting for you," Eleanor said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "He has requested a meeting at his office now." This was it, the final reckoning. Mia thought about refusing, slamming the door shut and hiding. But what was the point? She had nothing left to lose. Perhaps facing the man she had wronged was a penance she had to pay. "Okay," her voice was barely audible. "Let me just grab my shoes." As she followed the woman to the waiting car, Mia felt a sense of surreal detachment, as if she were watching a movie of someone else's life. The car door closed with a solid, expensive thud, sealing her inside. The interior was silent, smelling of leather and quiet power. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving her life of failure behind, Mia had no idea if she was being driven to her execution or to something else entirely. All she knew was that she was heading back into the world of the man whose life she had so spectacularly disrupted. The headquarters of Talred Inventions wasn't a building. It was a statement. A gleaming tower of glass and steel in the heart of Boston's tech hub, it looked as if it had been teleported from a decade in the future. The lobby was a cavernous, minimalist space of white marble and glowing blue light panels. Instead of receptionists, there were sleek, interactive terminals. The air hummed with a quiet, focused energy. It was a world away from the musty, antique luxury of the Gilded Kill. Here was where the future was built. Eleanor led Mia through security gates that opened with a silent biometric scan and into a private elevator. There were no buttons. Eleanor simply spoke into a small panel. "Mr. Croft's office." The elevator ascended with breathtaking speed and silence. Mia's stomach lurched, as much from nerves as from the movement. The doors opened directly into a vast corner office that seemed to hang in the sky, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city. The office was a study in organized chaos. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard covered in complex mathematical formulas and flowcharts. Books on quantum computing, philosophy, and poetry were stacked on every available surface. And in the center of it all, standing by the window, was Julian Croft. He wore the same gray hoodie, He turned as she entered, and for a moment they just looked at each other. The power dynamic was now completely, terrifyingly inverted. He was the architect in his high-rise sanctuary. She was the ghost from the service alley. "Ms. Bance," he said. His voice was different here. In the restaurant it had been raspy and tired. Here it was calm, measured, and resonant with authority. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." He gestured to one of two simple chairs in front of a large, uncluttered desk. Eleanor gave a slight nod and exited, the elevator doors closing behind her with a soft hum, leaving them alone. Mia sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. She decided to face it head-on. "Mr. Croft, I don't know why I'm here, but before you say anything, I want to apologize. What I did was inexcusable. I made a snap judgment based on nothing. I was stressed, and I was wrong, and I am deeply, deeply sorry for the embarrassment and trouble I caused you." Julian walked over and sat in the other chair, not behind his desk, but beside her, so they were equals, looking out the window. It was a disarming move. "You were enforcing policy, Ms. Bance?" he said simply. "I was rude and prejudiced," she corrected. "It cost you a $200 million deal." He remained silent for a long moment, his gaze on the city below. "Did it?" he asked, more to himself than to her. He turned to look at her, his hazel eyes intense. "I didn't bring you here to reprimand you. I brought you here because I have a question. A real one. Why did you do it? And don't give me the company policy answer. I saw your face. Was there something else?" The question caught her completely off guard. She had expected a reprimand, a lawsuit, a threat, not curiosity. She hesitated, then decided the truth was all she had left. "I needed that job," her voice trembling slightly. "My brother is sick. The medical bills are significant. I'm a student at MIT on scholarship, and that job was the only thing keeping us afloat. Your table 7 is the best in the house. The tips from that single table could cover a week of his medication. You were sitting there not ordering, looking like you didn't belong, and every minute you stayed felt like you were pulling money directly from my brother's hands. It was desperation. I looked at you and didn't see a person. I saw an obstacle, and that was my mistake." She finally ran out of breath, her confession hanging in the quiet, sunlit office. Julian didn't respond immediately, just nodded slowly, absorbing her words. There was no pity in his expression, but there was a flicker of something else. "Integrity," he said softly. "You have integrity." "Elaborate?" she asked, turning to the window. "Misdirected in that specific moment, perhaps, but your underlying motivation was sound. You were given a set of rules and a responsibility, and you executed them even when it was uncomfortable. You confronted a person you thought was an obstacle to protect someone you love. You weren't trying to be cruel, you were trying to survive within the system you were given." He stood and walked to his desk, picking up a tablet. "My company," Tal read, "is built on logic, on systems, but systems are only as good as the people who run them. People who can think critically and act decisively, people who aren't afraid to enforce the rules." He looked at her, and a wry smile touched his lips for the first time. "Frankly, Ms. Bance, my head of security could learn a thing or two from you. You kicked me out much more efficiently than most of our competitors have ever managed." Mia didn't know how to react. A joke. He was making a joke. "Mr. Croft, Julian," he corrected. "And I'm not finished. I brought you here for a second reason. I had my assistant Eleanor do some digging on you after the incident. Amelia Bance, top of her class at MIT, computer science with a focus on predictive analytics and machine learning ethics. Your thesis proposal is on a model to assist at-risk youth." He knew everything. Mia felt utterly exposed, as if he had peeled away her waitress uniform and seen the lines of code written on her soul. "I had doubts about the deal with Torn," Julian said, his voice turning serious. "Deep doubts. Selling to Marcus would have made me very rich, but it felt wrong, like selling a child. I went to that restaurant to think. I was looking for a sign, any sign that I was on the wrong path." He paused, looking directly at her. "And then a fiercely principled, underpaid waitress who happens to be one of the brightest minds in my field tried to kick me out. If that's not a sign, I don't know what is." He placed the tablet on the desk between them. "So, I want to show you something, Ms. Bance. I want to show you exactly what you saved me from." Julian tapped the tablet screen, and a complex series of documents and code repositories filled the display. "This was the deal," he began, his tone shifting from philosophical to that of a focused engineer. On the surface, it was a straightforward acquisition. Tournai Allied wants Talred Inventions for $200 million. I stay on for a 2-year transition period. Our flagship AI, Oracle, integrates into Torn's global logistics network. Everyone wins. He slid through pages of dense legal jargon. Lawyers reviewed it for months. My tech leads scrutinized their integration plans. Everything looked clean. He paused, zooming in on a particular appendix in the contract, Appendix C7, a section on proprietary code escrow and verification. This was Torn's big sticking point. He insisted that before the deal was finalized, his team needed to run a compatibility and security audit on Oracle's core. We'd put the source code into a secure third-party escrow. They'd run their diagnostics, and once it was verified as stable and secure, the money would transfer. Mia leaned forward, her former fear replaced by a growing academic curiosity. This was the language she understood. "That seems standard for a tech acquisition of this size," she said. "It is," Julian nodded. "And that's why we overlooked it. The trap is not in what's there, but in how it's framed." He changed the view to a window full of code. It was elegant, complex, and beautiful. It was the heart of Oracle. "This is our baby. Oracle doesn't just process data, it learns, it anticipates. Its core value is in its predictive heuristic algorithms. The same thing you're studying. It can predict market shifts, supply chain disruptions, even social trends with surprising accuracy." He then opened another window showing the diagnostic script Tornai's team had submitted for the audit. "This is their verification tool. My team reviewed it. It looks like a standard stress test. It bombards Oracle's core with the data, checks for memory leaks, assesses processing speed, and logs the output." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "They told us it was a benign diagnostic, but I had a nagging feeling. Something felt too perfect. Marcus Torn is not a perfect, tidy man. He's a shark who smells blood in the water." Julian pushed the tablet toward her. "Look at it. You're a fresh pair of eyes. Unbiased by months of negotiations. Unblinded by a 9-figure payout. Tell me what you see." Mia took the tablet, her fingers tracing the cool glass. The initial fear had completely vanished, replaced by an intense, thrilling focus. This was her element. She began to scroll through the lines of code in the diagnostic script. It was expertly written, clean, and well documented. It did exactly what it claimed to do. For 10 minutes she read, her brow furrowed in concentration. It was a standard, if aggressive, diagnostic. She was about to say so when something caught her eye. A seemingly innocuous function call within a data logging module, log export transient. Transient logs are temporary, usually overwritten after a session. Exporting them wasn't unusual, but it was the way it was being called. It was linked to an encryption library that wasn't part of the standard package. It was a custom library, referenced from a separate file. "Mr. Croft," Julian corrected. She slowly pointed to the line. "This function here, what library is it calling for encryption?" Julian leaned in, his eyes widening as he saw what she was pointing to. T-lock encryption, proprietary to Torn. They said it was for securely transmitting the log files back to their server for analysis. "Show me the TLOC library file," Mia said, her heart beginning to beat faster. Julian navigated to the file. It was obfuscated, meaning the code was deliberately made difficult to read. A common practice for proprietary software, but also a huge red flag in a security audit. "Can we de-obfuscate it?" Mia asked. "Give me a minute," Julian said, his fingers flying across a virtual keyboard projected onto his desk. He executed a series of commands, his own powerful software tools attacking the scrambled code. The lines of text resolved on the screen, and then they saw it. Buried deep within the encryption library, there was a hidden command. The function log export transient, triggered by a massive data query, the final step of the stress test, would create a compressed, encrypted, and almost invisible copy of Oracle's entire core, the source code, the crown jewels of Talred Inventions. This copy wouldn't be sent with the main log files. It would be fragmented into thousands of tiny, innocuous data packets and slowly leaked over hours through a low-priority network port that no one would think to monitor. Once outside Talred's firewall, the packets would be reassembled on a Torn-controlled server. It was the most brilliant, sinister piece of corporate espionage Mia had ever seen. Tournai Allied would have a perfect, stolen copy of Oracle. They would then declare the audit to have failed, citing some manufactured security flaw. They would publicly withdraw their $200 million offer, collapsing Talred's stock price. A few months later, they'd launch their own new predictive AI, a barely disguised Oracle clone, and drive Talred into bankruptcy. Marcus Torn wouldn't just acquire the company, he'd steal its soul for free and destroy his competition in the process. The $200 million wasn't a price, it was the bait for the trap. Mia looked up from the tablet, her face pale. "It's a Trojan horse," she whispered. "The whole audit, it's a Trojan horse." Julian Croft stared at the screen, then at Mia. The exhaustion had vanished from his eyes. It had been replaced by a cold, hard fire. "Yes," his voice dangerously low. "It is. And you, Miss Bance, just save me from opening the gates to it." The air in Julian's office grew thin, sharp, and intensely focused. The discovery of the Trojan horse code was like a detonation in a soundproofed room, silent but utterly devastating. All the oxygen seemed to have been sucked out by the tablet Mia held, consumed by the glowing, malevolent lines of code displayed on its screen. Julian, who had been a statue of weary contemplation in the restaurant, was now transformed. He began to pace in front of the vast window, not with the aimless anxiety of a man lost in thought, but with the predatory, focused energy of a general moments before a battle. His exhaustion had been burned away, replaced by the cold, hard fire of purpose. "He would have gotten away with it," Julian said, his voice a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the polished floor. "It's perfect. It's patient. It's evil. My team, the best engineers, the most paranoid security analysts in the business. Everyone missed it. I almost missed it." He stopped, gently tapping his palm against the glass, the sound a dull thud against the panoramic city view. "We were so focused on the finish line, on the 9-figure number, on the sheer relief of being done with the fight that we forgot who we were dealing with. A snake." He turned from the window, his intense hazel eyes fixing on Mia. She felt a tremor of fear, not of him, but of the sheer gravity of the situation she now found herself in. She was no longer a waitress, or just a student. She was a key witness, a co-conspirator in the counterattack that was about to unfold. "But you saw it," Julian continued, his voice softening slightly, turning analytical. "You weren't on the team. You didn't have months of negotiation context. You hadn't been staring at this code for weeks, so tell me again what you saw that we didn't." Mia swallowed, her throat dry. She had to force herself to think, to articulate the instinct that had guided her through the digital maze. "You all saw a forest," she began, the analogy forming in her mind. "A massive, complex ecosystem of a deal. You were mapping everything, checking the health of the canopy, the flow of the rivers, but I was just looking at the trees." She pointed with a trembling finger at the tablet. "That log export transient function call felt wrong, not technically, but philosophically." "Philosophically?" Julian leaned closer, intrigued. "Yes," Mia said, gaining confidence, as she entered her own area of expertise. "When you write code to build something useful, your priorities are clarity, efficiency, and stability. You want the next person who looks at your code to understand it instantly. But when you write code to hide something, your priorities shift. You prioritize cunning, obfuscation, making things seem like something they're not. That line of code was too cunning. It was a flourish. It was a piece of poetry. In the middle of a technical manual. It didn't fit. It was designed to be overlooked because of its seeming insignificance. And that's what made it so significant." A slow smile, the first genuine one she had seen on him, spread across Julian's face. It completely shifted his demeanor, erasing the last shadows of weariness. "Poetry," he repeated softly. "Exactly. You think like an architect, Ms. Bance, not just a programmer. You look for intent, for purpose, for the why behind the what. That's not a skill that can be taught." He walked to his desk and pressed an almost invisible button on its surface. "Eleanor," his voice was now crisp and authoritative. "Get me David Chen and Sarah Jennings on a secure conference call, priority 1, and then put Marcus Torney on a separate line. Tell him I've had a breakthrough regarding the deal. Let him think I'm crawling back." "Right away, Mr. Croft," came the disembodied reply. Within a minute, 2 faces appeared on the window screen. A man with sharp features and tired, intelligent eyes, David Chen, Talred's CTO, and a woman with a severe bob haircut and an expression of formidable calm, Sarah Jennings, the company's general counsel. "Julian, what's going on?" David asked, his background showing the same minimalist aesthetic as the rest of the company. "David, Sarah, I'm here with Amelia Bance, Julian began, gesturing toward Mia, who suddenly felt like an exhibit in a museum. Ms. Bance has found something in the diagnostic script of Appendix C7, something your team's missed, something I missed. David Chen's expression tightened with professional pride and a hint of skepticism. Sarah Jennings' face remained a polite, unreadable mask. Ms. Bance, Julian prompted gently, if you would. With a pounding heart, Mia rose and walked to the desk, turning the tablet so the camera captured the screen with a clarity that even surprised her. She explained her discovery to them. She described the seemingly innocuous function, the custom encryption library, the obfuscated code, and the final, terrifying revelation of the steganographic routine. She explained how it was designed to leak the company's core source code through a port no one would monitor. As she spoke, she watched as David Chen's face cycled from skepticism to shock and then to a pale, sick horror. He, the CTO, had been days away from personally handing the keys to his kingdom over to the enemy. Sarah Jennings, for her part, leaned closer to her screen, her eyes narrowing as she instantly grasped the monumental legal implications. My God, David whispered when Mia finished, running a hand over his face. It's a digital heist. He was never going to buy us. He was going to gut us. The legal exposure for Torn Allied is catastrophic, Sarah Jennings stated, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. This is wire fraud, trade secret theft, conspiracy. We can bury them. That's the plan, Julian said, his eyes glinting. But first, confirmation. He nodded to Eleanor, who was listening. Put him through. The screen flickered, and Marcus Torn's face replaced the others. He was in a lavish, wood-paneled office, a portrait of old money arrogance. A smug, confident smile was plastered across his face. Julian, good to hear from you, Torn boomed, his voice dripping with condescension. I trust you've come to your senses. Don't worry, the offer's still on the table. We'll just have to deduct the cost of my lunch from the final price. Julian let the silence hang for a beat too long, forcing Torn's smile to falter just a fraction. Marcus, he began, his voice dangerously soft. I've been thinking a lot about the deal, specifically our security protocols. Ah, yes, can't be too careful, Torn said, regaining his swagger. Exactly, Julian nodded. I was just reviewing Appendix C7 again, your diagnostic script. It's a very impressive piece of work, very thorough. Only the best for my future assets, Torn said with a chuckle. It's the TC encryption that truly fascinates me, but yeah, Julian continued, circling the trap. Proprietary, of course. I can only imagine the genius it took to write it. Tell me, Marcus, does the name come from Tornlock, or is it short for Trojan Lock? The blood drained from Marcus Torn's face. The sudden, raw terror in his eyes was visceral. His smug mask didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. No, I don't know what you're talking about, he stammered, but the lie was pathetically transparent. Julian didn't need to press, he simply nodded to an off-screen camera. The faces of Mia, David, and Sarah reappeared in small windows alongside Torn. My CTO, David Chen, has been admiring your work, Julian said. David, please share your professional assessment. David, his face a mask of cold fury, leaned into his camera. Mr. Torn, your script contains a steganographic data exfiltration routine that activates on the final query of the stress test. It's designed to copy Oracle's entire core and transmit it in fragmented packets through port 44, a port typically used for low-priority system updates. It is the most blatant act of industrial espionage I have ever witnessed. And my general counsel, Sarah Jennings, has been reviewing the relevant statutes, Julian added calmly. Based on our preliminary assessment, Mr. Torn, Sarah said, her voice like splintering ice, you and your executive board face multiple federal charges with potential prison sentences of 20 to 30 years and fines that will exceed your company's total valuation. We have a complete, unedited, time-stamped copy of your malicious code from the escrow servers. The evidence is irrefutable. Torne was gasping now, his face shining with sweat. Julian, wait, let's be reasonable. This is just a misunderstanding, a programming error. We can fix this. What do you want? $300 million? $400? Name your price. It was the last, desperate gambit of a man who believed everything and everyone could be bought. Julian Croft let him finish, then delivered the final, fatal blow. The price, Marcus, is integrity, and it's a currency you are bankrupt in. The deal is off. He looked away from Torn's pleading, pathetic face and addressed his team. Sarah, proceed. alert the SEC and the district attorney's office. David, begin a full internal security review. I want to know how this slipped past us. Julian, no, please, Torn pleaded from the screen. Julian made a simple, dismissive gesture. Eleanor's invisible hand ended the call. Marcus Torn's face disappeared, replaced once more by the serene, indifferent beauty of the Boston skyline. The war was over. The victory was total. A heavy silence filled the office. David and Sarah nodded grimly and disconnected, leaving Julian alone with Mia once more. He walked to the window and stood there for a long time, watching the tiny cars move on the streets far below. He built his empire on theft and intimidation, Julian said quietly, more to himself than to Mia, and I almost added my life's work to his collection. He turned to her, a deep, profound exhaustion briefly returning to his features, but this time mingled with relief. Thank you, he said, and the two words carried the weight of billions of dollars and thousands of jobs she had just saved. Thank you for seeing the poetry. He motioned for her to sit in the chair across from him again. So, Ms. Bance, he began, his tone shifting back to business. That leaves us with your current situation. You are, through no fault of your own, unemployed. The word hung in the air, a stark reminder of the reality that existed outside this glass tower. Yes, sir, Mia whispered. Unacceptable, he stated. He simply picked up his tablet and with a few taps, opened an organizational chart of Talred inventions. With a drag of his finger, he created a new, empty box reporting directly to him, the CEO. I have an opening. In fact, I'm creating a new division effective immediately, the Office of Code Audit and Algorithmic Ethics. Its mission will be to serve as the conscience of this company, to be my personal devil's advocate, to analyze everything we build, every line of code we write, every company we consider acquiring, and to find the flaws, not just the technical ones, but the ethical ones, to ask the uncomfortable questions, to look for the code that's too cunning. He looked at her, his expression serious. It will be demanding. You will be unpopular. You will have to challenge our best engineers and question my own assumptions. The salary, however, will be more than sufficient to cover your brother's medical care for the rest of his life. Your MIT tuition will be covered in full, and you'll receive a signing bonus that will make your student loan balance a distant memory. Mia's mind went blank. She couldn't breathe. Head of a division reporting to the CEO. It was impossible. It was a dream. I'm still a student, she stammered, the words feeling foolish as soon as they left her lips. I haven't even graduated. A procedural detail, Julian said with a dismissive wave. We'll build your work schedule around your classes until you graduate. I'm not hiring you for your degree, Amelia. I told you. I'm hiring you for your perspective. I'm hiring you because you have integrity in a world desperately lacking it. I need people who aren't afraid to tell me I need to leave the restaurant, metaphorically speaking, when I'm on the wrong path. He stood and extended his hand across the desk. It wasn't a gesture of dismissal, but of partnership. Your thesis is about using predictive analytics to protect at-risk youth. That's the spirit I want at the core of this company. I want to build technology that protects, not exploits. I can't do that if my own house isn't in order. I need you to be its architect. Hot, overwhelming tears welled in Mia's eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or fear, but of a joy so profound it was painful. This wasn't a job offer. It was a lifeline. It was a validation of every sleepless night spent coding, every sacrifice made for her brother, every ounce of her being that believed technology could be more than just a tool for profit. Her catastrophic error hadn't been a fatal flaw. It had been a crucible, one that had burned away the scared waitress and revealed the confident, capable architect beneath. She stood, her posture straight and sure, and took his hand. His grip was firm, a stark contrast to the crumpled $5 bill he'd left on the table that felt like another lifetime. Yes, her voice was clear and strong, without a trace of the tremor that had plagued her for so long. Yes, Mr. Croft, I would be honored. And so Amelia Bance's life was transformed, not by a lottery ticket or a stroke of luck, but by a single, terrifying moment of doing what she thought was right. Her story is a powerful reminder that our true character is not defined by the titles we hold or the clothes we wear, but by the choices we make under pressure. Julian Croft was not saved by his lawyers or his board of directors. He was saved by a struggling student who saw an injustice and refused to look away. Her journey shows us that sometimes the most unexpected encounters can lead to the most extraordinary destinations, and that integrity, even when it feels like a burden, is the most valuable asset we will ever possess. If this story of how a single act of bravery changed everything resonated with you, please show your support by clicking the like button. For more real-life stories about incredible turns of fate, be sure to subscribe to Stories of Black Women and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. And we want to hear from you. What would you have done in Mia's position? Let us know in the comments below.